never seen an infestation of locusts, but I have lived through an emergence of periodical cicadas. Cicadas are rather large insects. They look sort of like really, really big flies, many species of which would live most of their lives underground as nymphs, emerging from the ground all at once every 13 years or so. The event at its height can seem almost apocalyptic. I lived in Nashville, Tennessee, the last time the brood in that region emerged. I had been out of town for about a week, and when I came back, I am not exaggerating in the slightest when I say these things were everywhere. They're big, about 5 centimeters long on average. They don't move very fast, but they also seem to move with almost intentional disregard for their surroundings, smashing into windshields, into windows, into me. One took a ride in my hair once, but that's another story. These things sing sort of like crickets do. They're loud, especially at night, singing all at once in the trees. They plant their eggs in little grooves they carve into tree branches and molt, leaving their exoskeletons just scattered everywhere. What I found so astounding about the cicadas was how overwhelming their presence was. Out of nowhere, it seems they're flying everywhere, making noise constantly, exoskeletons covering trees. During the height of their emergence, I was reminded of perhaps a smaller scale version of the way locusts are described in biblical narratives. We read in Scripture about plagues of these creatures destroying everything in their path, which isn't actually what cicadas do, but it sure seems like they could. Locusts are actually, it would seem, basically grasshoppers on steroids, although where that steroid-like response comes from is really anybody's guess. Even now, scientists still don't know quite why grasshoppers suddenly decide to become vast clouds of equal opportunity destruction providers, cutting, swarming, hopping, and destroying, as Joel describes. A locust plague is the scenario within which Joel makes his plea to the people in the 2nd chapter, which we read today. The whole 1st chapter of the book, in fact, has been full of devastation and grief, the implied culprit being a massive swarm of locusts. Is this a literal ecological disaster, or a metaphor for a military crisis, a hostile army attacking his people newly returned from exile? I don't really know, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure it matters very much. The point is, the people are being overwhelmed, overrun. It doesn't too much matter by what. Destruction abounds, and there seems nothing left to do to stop it. Almost nothing is known about the prophet Joel. It's not even especially clear when this book was written. Language and grammar points to after the exile, while the placement of the canon between Hosea and Amos points to a view that Joel's ministry occurred earlier. Whether during or after the exile, Judah likely feels hemmed in on all sides by political, cultural, and social chaos, which is something we might know something about. I can understand why a plague of locusts would have seemed a good metaphor for their environment, even if there wasn't a literal army or swarm of insects on their border. This overwhelming sense of a destructive cloud descending to consume everything in its path. I think we all have some sense of what that might look and feel like. The people of Nepal have felt their land literally tearing apart beneath them. They are now faced with a death toll so catastrophic it is hard to imagine there's anyone who has not felt some loss. And access to food, water, and shelter, which was already difficult, now for many seems virtually impossible. The increasingly nebulous nature of war removes men and women from their families and places them in the middle of volatile regions where peace is hardly even a distant memory anymore. Another suicide bombing, another drone attack, another offensive, we're not even surprised anymore. And refugees flood neighboring countries as their homes are abruptly taken away. In the city where we're sitting right now, storms and flooding have left many people without a clear sense of what comes next. Citizens have been attacked by police, police have been attacked by citizens, and we're all left to wonder, why can't this just stop? This sense of a plague of locusts, being hemmed in by destructive, overwhelming forces beyond our control, that feeling is starting to seem all too familiar. In the face of the destruction and fear indicated by Joel in the 1st chapter, these 3 verses in the 2nd chapter are in the center of his call to response. Oddly enough, in the face of an army or an infestation of insects or whatever it is, Joel's message doesn't exactly seem to be rallying the troops for a charge, which seems to be the natural human response to what scares us. He is inviting his people in, rather than sending them out. Joel tells them to blow the horn in Zion. Calling all the people together, he insists on an assembly, a holy meeting, a fast. It seems that for Joel, the appropriate response to whatever is overwhelming them is worship, not mounting an army of their own. All the people, even the newlyweds and the infants, must be gathered. That's how important this act of worship is. Can't you just imagine? Let's say for the sake of argument that this is a literal plague of locusts, or even a human army. Crops have been destroyed, the environment is virtually unlivable. Joel wants them to sit down together and pray? Seriously? What on earth will that accomplish? But on the other hand, what on earth is left for them to do? And the priests will lead them, will stand at the altar crying for mercy. The moment seems to be as much about the communities that surround them as it is about the people of Judah themselves. Don't make your inheritance a disgrace, an example of failure among the nations. Don't let them think we have lost your favor, that you are no longer on our side. But the question which is given to the people, the nations surrounding them, is the one I am quite sure the people of Judah are asking themselves. Where is their God? Where is our God? It's interesting that this passage is often read as part of the lectionary for Ash Wednesday. At the beginning of the season of Lent, many people decide to give something up. This is intended to be not a chore, not an experiment with a new diet or a moment to get rid of that one word we like saying a little too much, but a spiritual practice creating space for us to connect to God and to the tasks of repentance and preparation that are set in this season. In reality, I think it's easy to lose sight of that and make it less about the practice and more about the something. The reality and the struggle of the journey to the cross, this practice of worship is part of the journey which Lent invites us to take with Jesus, is lost in the shuffle of whatever it is we've decided to focus our attention on or keep our attention from. So what are we left with when we let go of the focus on the something? I give up. Those are very powerful words. Those moments we all have when we just want to say, I can't do this anymore. I give up. That rings more true to the long, slow trudge through Lent to Easter than we might like to admit. It rings more true to the daily work of believing in a God we can't always see than we'd like anyone to know. It is all well and good to read and hear and know of a God who loves us and cares for us and carries us. But some days we all look around at this world and this journey and wonder if this belief will carry us through. I give up. Where is our God? The question and the statement often come together. That's where the people of Judah are. The way Joel describes their world in the first part of this chapter is essentially to say the pain and suffering is too much. We have nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. We are being overrun. We are all ready to give up. And so this act of worship he invites them to is an invitation to say to one another, we give up. Where is our God? In thinking about the reality of pain in our human communities, Janet Hunt writes of the way that pain functions in our human physiology. This is the sort of pain which alerts us that something is wrong, wounded, or broken in our own bodies. In the same way, that nagging sense that something is not right in the world, in our world, between those closest to us or people far away, it alerts us to the truth that something is terribly wrong and is crying out for healing. The call of this passage, what Joel invites his people to do in these few verses, is to stop and to listen and to ask of that pain, where is our God? James Cone writes in The Cross and the Lynching Tree, the Christian gospel is God's message of liberation in an unredeemed and tortured world. As such, it is a transcendent reality that lifts our spirits to a world far removed from the suffering of this one, and yet The Christian gospel is more than a transcendent reality, more than going to heaven when I die, to shout salvation as I fly. It is also an imminent reality, a powerful, liberating presence among the poor right now in their midst. The gospel is found wherever poor people struggle for justice, fighting for their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Where we find the pain and suffering in our world, that is also where we find God. When Joel's community looks out at their world and asks, where is our God? The point is that God is already there, already at work, that God will work for their redemption alongside them within their story. This chapter goes on to describe very concrete things that God will do in their land and for their people within the context of what life already looks like for them. Joel's message is a call for his people to seek redemption, but it is also a message that God still cares for God's children, even though things look pretty terrible right now. That is the message of many of the prophets, the message of Jesus' ministry among the least of these, the message we try to preach all the time. God still cares for God's children. But yet we're still asking the question, where is our God? The Gungor song titled Heaven has incredibly complex instrumentals to back up a very straightforward text. I don't know what you've been told, but heaven is coming down to the world. Heaven is all around. That's it. Although I think the point of the complex instrumental track behind the lyrics may well be that's not it. I really want to tie the message up for you with a pretty little bow, but I can't. The people of Nepal are still surrounded by devastation. Entire countries in the Middle East are still caught in the midst of war beyond my understanding. We're watching racial tension tear American cities apart. 9 people died in a sanctuary in Charleston, South Carolina yesterday. Joel's people are overwhelmed and devastated, and they've absolutely run out of options. In the face of this, we long for that transcendent eschatological reality, redemption beyond history. We want to say, I give up, figure out where God is, so we can go there. Because there must be somewhere else, somewhere better. But where is our God? Heaven is coming down to the world. The Spirit of the Holy is at work here and now, not somewhere else later on. Wherever people struggle for freedom and hope and peace, God is in the midst of them. We know this is true because when Jesus walked this earth, that is where he walked. We know this is true because when God speaks in our scriptures, that is who God speaks to. That is where God is. And so if we're looking for God, that is where we should go. Where is our God? When we ask this question of the pain and suffering we see in our world, we must be prepared for the response. Where are God's people? May we be heaven coming down. May we be heaven